Unfortunately, I think that this very short judgment strongly begins well, but then ends up not only contradicting itself, but also contradicting the international law that occupies the field, which is the UDHR and the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights.
Certainly, every public place is open for protests also. You can't say that protests can only be at designated places. Yeah, so in my view, there are some things in the judgment which are very odd. For example, the court says that protests can only be in designated places. And they quote Himmat Lal Shah to justify this proposition. Himmat Lal Shah, in fact, says exactly the opposite. Himmat Lal Shah says that you cannot restrict the right to protest to only a few places or have a requirement for prior permission, etc.
It cites the constitutional bench in Himmat Lal, and it says, and I'm going to read it because why not read the words as they are. They say that the state cannot by law abridge or take away the right of assembly by prohibiting assembly on every public street or every public space. The state can only make regulations in aid of the right of assembly of each citizen and can only impose reasonable restrictions in the interest of public order, right? So this judgment says quite clearly that you can only limit the right to protest with reference to Article 19.2, which is the violation of the public order. Now, what is public order? There's a long line of Supreme Court judgments that define public order. Public order is not the disruption of traffic. Public order is not even some rowdy elements committing some crime, although there's no allegation here of that. That's not a disruption of public order either. Public order is a threat to the very rule of law, right? So maybe a riot, or maybe large scale assault on the state. I mean, an assault on the state or something as big as that, you know? There is no evidence whatsoever that there was that violation of public order here. Indeed, reading the judgment, it's not even recorded as alleged, right? So can you then limit the right to protest with regard to that?
The authorities in that sense do need to balance the right to protest with the right of other citizens to move freely, etc. But you cannot say that in every case the right of free movement will trump the right to protest, which is what to some extent this judgment seems to suggest.
These blanket statements are a problem because you can't, in a blanket manner, spatially decide what's going to happen in terms of prohibition of protest in advance of any such consideration of the nature of the protest and the various interests that would be affected. Also, international law on this is fairly clear, that it says that you have to look at these assemblies on a case-by-case basis. So the UN Special Rapporteur's report on the freedom of assembly says that blanket bans, including on the exercise of the right entirely, or, and this is important, any exercise of the right in specific places or at particular times, are intrinsically disproportionate. Now think of how strong that is. Because they preclude consideration of the specific circumstances of each proposed assembly. Assemblies are an equally legitimate use of public space as commercial activity or, and this is important, the movement of vehicles and pedestrian traffic. Any use of public space requires some measure of coordination to protect different interests, absolutely. So if one road is blocked, open up another road, slight inconvenience, you know, you have to take a detour, for example, right? But there are many legitimate ways in which individuals may use public spaces, and a certain level of disruption to ordinary life caused by assemblies, including disruption of traffic, annoyance, and even harm to commercial activities, must be tolerated if the right is not to be deprived of its substance. And it also talks of how there is an obligation on states to facilitate protests.
Though this judgment is in the teeth of that Himmat Lal Shah, which is a judgment of a larger bench, and therefore it is per incuriam in that sense, but unfortunately the authorities and the police will use this judgment to further restrict protests in public places, etc., and designate, like they have been doing for a long time, designated only Jantar Mantar as a protest site. They are not allowing protests in most other places, etc.
Surely the state should be able to see those who are protesting against them. Surely the average citizen should be able to see and hear what protesters are saying. Surely you shouldn't have a bunch of stalls, which is basically a little protest mela that is packed in and insulated against not just the traffic, but the general population, where the protesters are basically only talking to themselves. And not only does this take away the lifeblood of any protest, it means that neither the state nor citizens know what problems the protesters are facing. Whether it's Bhopalis who have trekked miles and miles and miles from Bhopal in a Padyatra, who are not getting safe water, who to this day are suffering kind of genetic mutations and not getting adequate compensation, to Asim Trivedi, who had cases of sedition on him because he made a cartoon, to the right to food. And you just pack them in one little street, rather than them walking down Rajpath onto North and South Block, onto Rashtrapati Bhavan, saying, these are our problems, look at us, hear us.